Many of our videos are in essence book reviews, since we prefer to quote the classical and modern authors to encourage our listeners and readers to study and reflect on these classics. In this video are book reviews on the books that we use to study the Decalogue, in addition to the scriptures themselves. Our first sources are the Lutheran and Catholic Catechisms. They discuss each of the 10 Commandments. Pope Benedict, also known as Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was supervising the compilation of the Catechism, balanced the footnotes for the sources used in the Catechism between the Eastern and Western Church Fathers, which means this is an excellent study program for studying the writings of the Church Fathers for both the Catholic and Orthodox religious traditions. The Bishop's version of the Catholic Catechism is available online. This is our preferred edition because of its extensive indices. We have many videos on each of the 10 Commandments in the Decalogue, plus many more featuring writings from various Church Fathers, scholars, and preachers. Writings by the Eastern Church Fathers in the Philokalia and the Ladder of Divine Ascent by St. John Climacus include many discussions of various commandments. Most of these writings were written before the split between the Eastern and Western churches, so they're just as much Catholic as they are Orthodox. One treasure in Volume 4 of the Philokalia is the outstanding essay by St. Gregory Palamas on the New Testament Decalogue, which we'll emphasize in each of our videos on the commandments. We have essays on Martin Luther and his essays on the various of the 10 Commandments in both the Lutheran small and large catechisms. But the elephant in the room regarding Luther that needs to be confronted is his blatant anti-Semitism and his tendency to call the Pope some very nasty names, which we discuss in our video covering Luther and the Commandment, Do Not Envy. We cut another book review on the commentaries on the Torah by the great medieval rabbis, Rambam with an M, Ramban with an N, and Rashi. Rambam is also known as Maimonides and Ramban Nachmanides. We also review other books covering the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Old Testament, including the Book of Legends, which is a collection of moral teachings from the Talmud and many other mostly Jewish sources, and they're all in English. We've cut some videos on the Decalogue only using these Jewish sources, plus some surprisingly relevant and informative videos on chapters from Dr. Laura and her rabbi's book on the Decalogue. Now we'll discuss some of the individual books, and we have a commentary from the ancient Christian commentaries on Exodus and the other books after that. The University Press has published a series of selected commentaries by the ancient Eastern and Western Church Fathers, including many interesting obscure sources, and they're publishing some of these little-known sources in their own volumes. And this is one of the first commentaries I consult when I study the Bible, because I prefer the patristic commentary over the historical critical method. The IVP Reformation commentary on Exodus hasn't been published by mid-2022. Later we'll cut videos on the commandments using this as a source. MDL Moody's commentary on the 10 Commandments, Weight in Wanting, is also instructive, and we will continue to include them in our general videos on the commandments. And Dr. Laura and her rabbi has an excellent book on the 10 Commandments, including practical observations from her show that are not found elsewhere. She also includes commentary from both Jewish and Christian sources. And Brevard Child's commentary on Exodus is one of my favorite commentaries. He not only has valuable commentary on Exodus, but he also reviews the current scholarship and comments on the commentaries by Luther and many other Protestant sources. And this is one of the most readable and interesting Bible commentaries that I own. Going on to St. Thomas Aquinas, he wrote an easy-to-read catechism that discusses each of the 10 Commandments. This translation is rendered in bullet point PowerPoint style, but this is the actual complete Aquinas, and he lends himself very easily to that style. The Catholic Catechism references his teachings in Summa Theologica in the footnotes on the commandment, Do Not Slander. You can pick up inexpensive used copies of his 2 volumes in the Great Books, and many thousands of these sets were sold by Britannic salesmen back in the day, and many are still sitting in unread bookcases next to unplayed pianos in older homes all across America. And don't be intimidated by Aquinas' reputation for writing works that are inscrutable. His moral teachings are as easy to read and understand as are the Stoic teachings. We always like to consult the Conservative Baptist Broadman Bible Commentary, and my edition was printed before the conservative takeover of their seminaries. We haven't used them as a reference yet, but I'm sure we will eventually. And if you keep searching, you can eventually find a set of the Broadman Bible Commentary either on Amazon or in a used bookstore. And the Unseen Warfare contains teachings on the commandments. It is a third edition of a monastic spiritual manual written in the Middle Ages, edited with additions by Orthodox monks from Mount Athos. And this was derived from the first edition, which was also a Catholic classic, and that's The Spiritual Combat and Peace of the Soul, penned by Scopoli in 1589. And we're planning a series of videos on this sometime in 2023. When I was reading St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, I ran into a problem. And that is the footnoted reference to the do not slander commandment in the Catechism was to a section of the Summa Theologica that was not included in the 2-volume set I purchased, used. And how did I solve this? Well, I have an ebook on the Summa Theologica, but then the problem is they left out the part, question, and section numbers. Well, how do you solve that? Well, it's pretty easy. I went on the net and I found this website that has the table of contents of Summa Theologica. So it's a solution. Simple. You find the appropriate section in this or another table of contents, and then you do a text search in the ebook version for a title of what you wish to study, or a nearby selection with more unique words. And continuing with our review, we have reading Torah, the key to the Gospels. We're now studying the writings of the medieval rabbis on the Torah, and just as a reminder, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. All of the commandments of the Torah can be matched up with one of the 10 commandments. I realized that the style and cadence of the Synoptic Gospels clearly were inspired by the Torah. And this book seems to confirm this. Although he's merely a talented layman, this book does appear to have a wide reputation. And we have the Decalogue through the centuries, and it reviews the commentaries on the Decalogue by Rambam, Aquinas, Luther, Calvin, John Wesley, Karl Barth, Pope John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, and others. And I plan to do a video on this book and the book in the next column in late 2022. And the Decalogue in Jewish and Christian traditions contains interesting essays by many scholars, including essays on St. Augustine, St. Paul, Luther, natural law, and the Decalogue, and many other topics. And the book on the Torah was hiding in my bookcase when I cut the video blog on book reviews for the Torah, possibly because it was written by a Christian author. And he discusses the narrative cycles, including the Genesis primeval cycle, the Abraham cycle, the Jacob cycle, the Joseph cycle, and also essays on Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And we also want to discuss a rather interesting set of movies that I learned from Roger Ebert about the Decalogue, and some excerpts from the review. And Roger Ebert wrote this many years ago. I taught a class on the Decalogue a few years ago, and found that we lost a lot of time trying to match up the films and the commandments. There isn't a one-to-one correlation. Some films touch on more than one commandment. Others involve the whole ethical system suggested by the commandment. And these are not simplistic illustrations of the rules, but stories that include real people and the complexities of real problems. And he also says, these 10 films are not philosophical abstractions, but personal stories that involve us immediately. And after seeing the series, Stanley Kubrick observed that the directors have the very rare ability to dramatize their ideas rather than just talking about them. And there's not a moment when the characters talk about specific commandments or moral issues, and instead they're absorbed in trying to deal with real-life ethical challenges. And I also want to point out that we're sponsoring online viewings of the Decalogue films through 2022 in our meetup group. Many of the works written by the Apostolic Church Fathers discuss the various commandments often referenced by the Catechism. And we also discuss how to read the writings of the Apostolic and early Church Fathers. And this video also discusses how to read the works of the ancient Church Fathers, particularly those included in the 38-volume set of the writings of the Ante-Nicene, Nicene, and Post-Nicene Church Fathers, both East and West, which is now available in some excellent ebooks from Christian book distributors. Now, why did we label our video blog on ordinary life and justice in ancient Greece as part of our discussion of the commandment, do not slander? In scriptures, the exact wording of the commandment is, do not bear false witness against thy neighbor, which reflects the central role eyewitness testimony played in the ancient world, and indeed how sometimes eyewitness testimony was the only evidence admissible in ancient trials. Because forensic science really did not exist before it was invented by Sherlock Holmes, as we all know. In late 2022, we'll cut some videos on St. Thomas Aquinas and the 10 Commandments. Plus, we will continue to cut videos by ancient church fathers on the Decalogue, and in the past that includes ones by St. Augustine, St. Gregory of Nyssa, Shepherd of Hermas, and others. And many of these, but not all, are referenced in footnotes in the Catholic Catechism. In our video on our channel philosophy also applies to reflections on the Decalogue, since we discuss biblical interpretation and how Christians can profitably read Greco-Roman and modern Stoic and moral philosophy.